Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. My name is John Manley. I'm the attorney for 180 of Larry Nassar's victims in Michigan and California. We're here today to discuss a couple of issues that pertain to the investigation or lack of investigation of the goings-on at the Karolyi Ranch that caused so much harm to these, not only these young women here, but hundreds of other little girls. I want to start by first introducing the survivors here who are with us today. First is Jamie Dancher, NCAA champion gymnast and bronze medalist for 2000, Jamie. Jeanette Antolin, NCAA champion gymnast and former national team member. Kyla Spiker, who's a competitive gymnast from Michigan. Autumn Blaney and Chris Blaney. Autumn is 16 years old, is a survivor of Larry Nassar, was abused after 2015 and has never spoken publicly before today, so we're particularly proud of her courage. Lindsay Lemke, national team, junior national team member, and her mother, Christy Lemke. Lindsay was had gone to the ranch and again was abused after June of 2015 when Marta Karolyi was told, specifically, and admits she was told, that Larry Nassar had abused national team gymnasts and Olympians. I'm also pleased to introduce Mo Aziz with Abraham Watkins, who's one of the Texas lawyers that's doing these cases, and Michelle Simpson-Teagle, who is another attorney doing the cases from Waco, and attorney Brittany Nickel from the White Law Firm in Michigan, who'll contrast what the Michigan Attorney General has done versus the lack of investigation here in Texas. Texas hasn't received the coverage that the case has in Michigan, so just by way of covering this, there are over 320 victims that have come forward and either filed lawsuits or police reports against Larry Nassar. What we know is that the Michigan Attorney General is aggressively pursuing charges against Dr. Nassar's enablers. He's already been sentenced to 270 years in prison. He's served search warrants and done a variety of other things. Although we hadn't planned to address this, I wanted to address briefly, before I turn this over to my co-counsel, I wanted to address briefly the statement put out by Gary Jewell, Mrs. Karolyi's attorney yesterday, where he tried to explain her testimony, which in her deposition that I took in May of 2017, where she admits, under penalty of perjury, that she was made aware of by Steve Penny that Larry Nassar had molested little girls at the Karolyi Ranch in June of 2015. And Mr. Jewell's explanation was interesting. It was, it's actually one you hear frequently about, that I can hear about cases involving the mafia. Somebody's too old or too frail to testify or understand, and she just made a mistake. That's not what happened. And what Mr. Jewell, I guess, forgot is that after the deposition was over, it was sent to her, and she was given an opportunity to make changes to it. If there's an error in her testimony, she could change the testimony. And in fact, it's called an errata sheet, and I have it right here. It's right here. And she changed a whole bunch of stuff. She changed, times and dates on a variety of things. But there was no change at all to when she said Mr. Penny called her and told her about the abuse. And not only did she fill out the errata sheet and not mention it, she signed the deposition under penalty of perjury, leaving unchanged the testimony that she first knew in June of 2015. And let me tell you what Mr. Jewell's statement is. Mr. Jewell's statement is a desperate attempt to explain that he got caught and Ms. Karolyi got caught in a big fat lie. Mrs. Karolyi knew in June of 2015 that Larry Nassar had abused little girls. The law in Texas required her to immediately call the police or call Child Protective Services and report. And she didn't. And as a result, there are women standing up here, including a 16-year-old little girl, who were abused, molested after that time. And the responsibility for that lies squarely on Mrs. Karolyi, Mr. Penny, and Rhonda Fain's shoulders. You'll hear those names a lot today. Fain, Penny, and Karolyi. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who will talk about Texas law and what can be done.
My name is Michelle Simpson-Teagle, and I represent some of the Nassar survivors, including some survivors from the state of Texas where I practice. Had Miss Karolyi actually done what Texas law requires her to do, some of these women, including the brave 16-year-old Autumn standing here, who y'all are going to hear from, wouldn't be here. They wouldn't have had to suffer like they suffered. Now, I'm going to break down and just talk a little bit about Texas law, because Texas law requires a person, not even a professional, but a person, to immediately report child abuse, or it is a crime. We believe there are a number of crimes that the Karolyis are responsible for because of what happened on their property, not only civil liability, but criminal offenses that they committed by not protecting these young women. Injury to a child, endangering a child, failure to report. Some of these offenses have statutes of limitations that are about to run. Some of them have already run. So we are employing the AG's office in the state of Texas, imploring them to please act. That's really why we're here today, because it may be too late if they don't do so very soon. And we haven't seen any of that action beyond just statements that they're investigating. No one has been formally charged or arrested other than Larry Nassar. And we know there were all these adults who allowed him to continue to do this on Texas soil. And we owe these survivors and these victims more than that in Texas. They've done it in Michigan. I think Texas needs to step up.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Aziz. I'm a Houston lawyer. I have the honor to represent these young women, many of them who have had the strength to come forward, and many who still have not come forward. We know Nassar is gone for good, but there's many other adults that let these women down, let these little girls down, and we know the Karolyis had information about what was going on. We know there's other people at the U.S. Olympics, U.S. Gymnastics, who knew what he was doing. And there is civil consequence for all of that, but there should be some criminal charges as well to make sure that this sort of thing does not happen, not only in Texas, but all over the country. These little girls were let down by adults who profited from their hard work. And these girls were performing, were training, they gave their lives to train for their country, and in return, they were let down and allowed to be abused hundreds of times by Nassar. We are requesting the AG to take steps to make sure that everybody involved that is responsible for allowing these girls to be molested should be prosecuted. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brittany Nickel. I'm an attorney from Michigan who represents dozens of survivors. As was discussed, currently the Attorney General in Michigan is acting aggressively. He has appointed a special prosecutor for this independent investigation. Also, numerous search warrants have been executed. And most importantly, they've interviewed the survivors and parents of survivors. Within months of this independent investigation, additional charges have been issued, not against Nassar, but actually against his boss, where there's additional alleged criminal activity that also occurred. And the AG is continuing to investigate this. All of this is happening in Michigan, and those that are we're enablers are being held accountable, and it just can't be held accountable in Michigan, but also in Texas and wherever else the enablers were at.
And now I want to just introduce each survivor and have them speak. First will be Jeanette Antolin. Jeanette?
Hi, thank you all for coming. As a survivor, it's extremely disheartening to have to stand in front of you guys and explain why it's important to protect little girls. I remember the Penn State case and how quickly everyone moved on that because it was not just little boys, but it was football. Us as gymnasts, we represent our country. We try to win gold medals for our country, and I feel like we don't get the same attention as a male sport, which makes me very angry. So now we have to come and do press conferences to call for the state of Texas to actually do something and investigate something that is so important, not just to us, but to little girls all over the country that are trying to do a sport that they love. I just hope that our message is being heard and that action is going to be taken, because up until this point, nothing has really been done. And I don't think it's fair as a survivor to stand by and wait for people to do the right thing and make us come and stand in front of the media and beg for the right thing to be done. As adults, it's our responsibility to take care of kids, and I hope that the message gets across that this is what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Next will be Lindsay Lemke, and if her mom, Christy Lemke, wants to come up as well.
Hi there, my name is Lindsay Lemke, and this is my mom, Christy Lemke, and I wanted to touch a little bit on the age range of survivors that we have standing here today. We have ladies in their 30s, we have one who is a mom with a child, and we also have a 16-year-old, near 20 years difference from when they were abused. And if that doesn't speak volumes to people, I don't know what does, because there were girls being abused when I was born, when I was 1, when I was 2, when I was starting gymnastics, and those girls were going to the Olympics and being abused at the age of 16 already. And throughout that period of time, there were so many cries for help, and there were so many little girls who didn't know what to do, didn't know how to go about what was happening, being uncomfortable, and they cried out for help and nothing happened. And that is why an investigation needs to be done. If there's an investigation that is done, I feel like people would be shocked at the information that they would find of things that went wrong. And it does not matter your age, it does not matter how many times you're abused. Abuse is abuse, and it is not okay. And every single person who is abused by this man deserves justice. Statute of limitations should be extended to be able to serve that right to people, and that is something I firmly believe in, because every person deserves to have their voice, and their voice matters, and it is powerful, and it is strong. So an investigation must be done to be able to find out who knew what, when they knew it, and they need to be held accountable. Thank you.
Next, I'd like Jamie Dancher to come up and address you.
I can't understand why this is not taken seriously in Texas right now. As Jeanette said, in Penn State, it was football. There's 33 victims. How many little girls and young women does it take to take sexual abuse seriously? That's really all I want to say.
The next is Kyla Spiker.
I basically just wanted to say that I am a gymnastics coach in my hometown, and I coach age range from, we start at 18 months, and we coach all the way to 18 years before they go to college. And it just hurts me to know that we were let down by not one, not two, but multiple adults who failed to do not the right thing just as a person, but as a professional figure in the sport of gymnastics. And I just look at the girls that I coach in their leotards and just know I would bend over backwards to make sure that none of them have to go through what we went through. And that's why accountability needs to happen, because this shouldn't happen again. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't.
Next is Autumn Blaney and her mom, Chris Blaney. And again, this is the first time that Autumn has spoken publicly. And Autumn was abused for a full year after the Karolyis were aware, or Mrs. Karolyi was aware of Larry Nassar's accusations of being a molester in June of 2015.
I think that it is incredibly unfair that Marta didn't do her job and protect me, because I probably wouldn't be standing here if she would have. I think it's awful that I couldn't trust adults that were supposed to protect me throughout this process, and Larry probably would have never touched me if the adults did their jobs. Thank you.
So, a final word. Mr. Attorney General, there are 320 women and girls who cry out today for your help. Your job, sir, is justice. Your job, sir, is to find the truth. And if 300 girls being molested, 300 plus girls being molested, doesn't justify an investigation to find the truth and to find out what happened, then for God's sakes, what does? Thank you.
Question for Mo or for Michelle, please. Well, based on your knowledge of the Texas law procedures, what is the efficacy of having the Attorney General step in and having who was already investigated underway by the Texas Rangers and the Walker County Sheriff's
Let Michelle
Department? What benefit would that serve to the agency?
Sure. Well, if you look at cases that involve this number of victims and multiple jurisdictions in both federal and state law enforcement, it makes sense that the head attorney for the state would be involved in that investigation and that prosecution. If you look on the Attorney General's website, one of their duties is a liaison between state and federal government. We know that one of the initial reports was made to the federal government. It makes sense that the head attorney of the state of Texas would be involved in this and would at least be directing it and giving some of their resources, and we have not heard anything that they are, and we're asking them to.
Do you have any reason to believe that the investigation by the Texas Rangers in Walker County is not developing in a process that would be satisfactory to you and your client?
Well, we're coming up on some statutes of limitations in the next month for some potential offenses we believe the Karolyis could be responsible for. And so I haven't seen anyone formally charged, indicted, arrested. No search warrants. That's a good point. No one has had any search warrants, to our knowledge, executed at the ranch or on electronic devices, something that we've seen repeatedly in the state of Michigan with not only Larry Nassar, but also other people who were involved and worked with him. So we're asking for the same thing they've already done in Michigan and Texas.
Regarding the comment by Carter Karolyi, are you assuming that the investigation is happening to charge of breaking the minister, or is it going to be used just to impeach your testimony in trial at this point?
I mean, I think a perjury charge is something that's definitely possible, but our concern is holding her accountable for her failure to these little girls who are now young women, and for making sure that the people who allowed that to happen, that they're brought to justice. Now, perjury may be a part of that, but her failures under Texas law to report and to protect these young women, that's really what we're concerned about, and that's what we're asking the AG's office to dig into and actually do their job. I think Walker County, we haven't heard anything. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, we haven't seen anyone formally charged, arrested, or indicted. We've seen that in Michigan. Where are they? What are they doing? Tell us. Act. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the state of Texas. Step up.
Are you going to actually make a formal request to the AG's office, or is this the incentive that you're going to have?
So, if he doesn't get the message here, I don't think a formal request is going to do it. If he wants a letter, I'll send it. What I want to talk about Walker County is the focus of the Rangers has been Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar's been sentenced to jail for 270 years. Giving him more jail time, in my opinion, is a waste of public funds. If you are serious about this, you need to look at the documents. You need to execute search warrants. You need to look at computers. We know from our own investigation that there was emails going back and forth. I mean, look at the medical records that are there. There's 20 years of women standing here, most of whom were abused at the ranch. So we're not saying Mrs. Karolyi is necessarily guilty, but I think it deserves a look-see. And given that you have the Indiana Attorney General's office, the Michigan Attorney General's office looking into this, and Indiana is where USA Gymnastics is based. Given that a lot of it happened here, perhaps the Attorney General should look into it. I hope he will. I can tell you that our clients who've communicated with the Rangers, even in the last few weeks, have no indication that they're seriously looking at the Karolyis. So that's why we're here. None of these people would have gotten on a plane and come halfway across the country to talk about this if they believed Walker County was going to do the right thing. This is a crime that occurred across state lines and a crime that occurred internationally. Attorneys generals know each other. They need to coordinate this investigation with the feds and work together. And right now, Texas isn't doing that.
Based on that, there was a lawsuit filed in
I think that suit's involving U.S. Taekwondo. I can tell you we're not doing class actions in these cases. These victims have a right to have their own case heard in front of a jury, and we don't think a class action's appropriate.
Do you expect the cases to go to trial in California that you're dealing with, or is there any possibility of settlement?
I hope they go to trial because there's always a possibility of settlement. But my personal opinion is I want them to go to trial because the public needs to see the evidence in these cases. They do, because it's horrific. How can good people, look at little girls knowing they're abused, knowing he was going right back to Michigan, going to USAG gyms, and going right back to molesting people and say nothing? That's what people need to hear. And God help them if they do go to trial.
Do you have a list of people beyond Ron DeFay that the police specifically questioned?
Yeah, I think, yes I do. Mr. Penny, Paul Perilla, the president, Ron DeFane, who failed to report, Mrs. Karolyi, who failed to report, and a number of other staff in Indianapolis who was aware of this. There also is, there were two USA Gymnastics employees on the property, Gary Warren, who's a resident of Texas, and USAG's trainer, whose name is the longtime trainer Debbie Van Horn, who lived on the property. These people, Debbie Van Horn was in the rooms with him while he was doing this. I mean, these people need to be questioned. Maybe they did something wrong and maybe they didn't, but we don't know because the steps haven't been taken by law enforcement in Texas to find out. And that's wrong, and that's why we're here.
Sir, can you speak more to clients who have heard from the Rangers? What kind of they have?
Sure. I mean, I can tell you I had a conversation we represent a number of Olympians, with an Olympian who spoke to them 2 weeks ago and said, essentially, what are you doing about, the other people who enabled him? And it appeared to her, and the answer, I can't quote it, but the answer really was, well, we're focused on Nassar. And that's troubling. Consider for a moment if you were a parent of one of these children and you entrusted your child to the ranch. The parents weren't allowed at the ranch. There was no cell service. They were there alone. And there's a concept in law called in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. And you entrust your child to these people, and then you find out, in some cases, for 10 years, they were molested twice a day, 4 times a month. That's hundreds of times. I think that deserves a very serious criminal investigation. Very serious. And maybe it'll find nothing, but it deserves an investigation, and that hasn't happened. It deserves a search warrant. Not one search warrant? Not one? Come on. Seriously? Look at her computer. Look at their records. Look at his charts. Do something.
Can you address the Texas child protection statutes?
Sure. I'm going to let Michelle do that.
Sure. There are a number of statutes. There is a specific statute in Texas that makes it a crime to fail to report aggravated sexual assault of a child or to stop it. It's also a crime under the Family Code to fail to report any child abuse immediately for any person who knows about it. It is a crime to endanger a child, not just intentionally, but also by omission or criminal negligence. And not to get into too much of the legalese, but they didn't have to intentionally hurt these women. But by their failures and by their omissions under Texas law, we believe that they maybe did. It sure looks like it. So they may also be responsible under endangering a child statute, injury to a child. I mean, we have concerns about tampering with evidence in cases like this where we know some of that may have been going on for self-preservation purposes and to help USAG and themselves. And of course, perjury has been mentioned as well.
I didn't hear the question.
Do we have any evidence?
Well, you mean aside the fact they invited him for 20 years and let him be alone in the rooms with women in his hotel rooms?
In terms of the molestation.
So, keep in mind, we haven't been able to take anything other than very limited depositions. What we do know, for example, is that in 2011, Michaela Maroney reported to John Geddard that Larry Nassar was fingering her, who's a national team coach, who was at the ranch repeatedly. We know that that USAG's policies, which, by the way, Nassar helped write, their safety policies, specifically prevented girls from being alone in their rooms with any adult, man or woman. USAG was so obsessed with that, they wouldn't even let them be alone with male gymnasts who were also their same age on trips. But yet they were required, not allowed, required to go to Dr. Nassar's hotel room and be treated on his bed, or worse, Dr. Nassar would come to their hotel room and be treated on their bed internationally. He would go into their rooms, and Ms. Dancher and Ms. Antolin can address this, and abuse them in their beds, in their rooms at the Karolyi Ranch. At night, there was no security. If you had a problem, you had to call Dr. Nassar. I have yet for anyone at USA Gymnastics, any coach or anybody, to tell me who was in charge of security at the ranch. So it's not my job to do what the Attorney General does, but there is a lot of smoke, and of course we know there's fire in June of 2015 as to Mrs. Karolyi, and that needs to be looked into given the volume. There were over 50 girls molested in Michigan after June of 2015, when she admits in her deposition she knew. 50, probably more. Does that answer your question?
Now, some sort of direct link between the employees. There are different points about it.
Right.
Apart from failing to report.
Well, that is the crime, sir.
Okay, but as far as the reason
You mean do I think that Marta Karolyi intentionally allowed Larry Nassar to molest children? No, I don't. I hope not. But do I think that when she became, we do know is when she became aware, under penalty of perjury, she testified to that he had molested or was accused of molesting of Olympians. You know, the girls in question were Michaela Maroney, gold medalist, Allie Raisman, gold medalist, Maggie Nichols, world champion. She found out that in June of 2015. Now, you know, I think any person of goodwill, when you find that out, the first thing you do is you call the police. The second thing you do is get on the phone to the other girls in that time period and say, we found this out, are you okay? Has anybody from USA Gymnastics called any of you and asked if you're okay? No. So, the reason reporting statutes exist, and Texas is probably the broadest statute in the country, is to prevent exactly what happened here. We need to take this person off the street and deny them access to their victim pool. And that's the problem here. Maybe there's more. I'm not saying there is or there isn't. That's not my job. My job is to basically prod the Attorney General to do the right thing. And I hope he does.
How much time
So, yeah, good question. So, in 1997 or 98, the USA Gymnastics system changed, and they began to require gymnasts to come to the Karolyi Ranch, which was the national team training center. In 2010, became an Olympic training center for 4 days a month, about 11 months a year. Now, Miss Karolyi would have you believe that he was there once or twice a year. That's not true. All of our clients recall him being in almost every camp. Maybe he missed 1 or 2 a year, but the vast majority of the time he was there. So he was there 4 days a month from 98 until 2016. In the run-up to the Olympic Games and the World Championships, he's there from 45 to 30 days every day, giving these girls mandatory treatment. And it's important to remember, you didn't have a choice of whether you went to treatment. You had to go. So that's the answer. He wasn't at the ranch after that, but he went back to Michigan. She knew he was a Michigan State doctor, and she knew he treated gymnasts every night at John Getter's gym, Twistars, in Michigan. So we're not saying that he came back to the ranch after 2015. In fact, he wasn't there in June 2015. He was there in May. But that's when the disclosure happened in June. But he went back to Michigan and molested other girls. Had Miss Karolyi reported, and Mr. Penny reported, Mr. Fain reported, what they would have found is that he was under active criminal investigation by the Michigan State University Police in June of 2015 and for that entire year for doing precisely what he did to these girls in Texas. And he would have been arrested a year earlier. She would not have been touched during that year, and 50 other little girls who were molested. And that's my point. That's exactly why we have reporting statute, because it allows you to stop it in its tracks and separate him from the victims.
And you're saying that Arthur Karolyi knew that he committed crimes in Texas that the statute of limitations doesn't run out on?
Well, here's the requirement. If you have a suspicion, a reasonable suspicion, that a child has been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused, you must report it, right? So when the president of the organization calls you and says, hey, your doctor's not coming back, who's been with you 20 years because he's alleged to have sexually assaulted Allie Grace, Michaela Baroni, and Maggie Nichols, your obligation at that moment is to pick up the phone and call the police, okay? I think you also have an obligation to ensure, at least a moral obligation, if not a legal one, that he's separated from his victim. She didn't do that. Nor did Rhonda Fain, the head of the women's program, nor did Mr. Penny. Mr. Penny waited 5 weeks and then finally called the FBI. Instead, what they did is hire an unlicensed investigator to investigate whether they should report. That if you had enough information to investigate, you had enough information to report. That's the law.
So you're saying basically after June of 2015, what she did was nothing, or she was required to do something.
She did worse than nothing. She stayed silent, which is tantamount to actively concealing it. I mean, we know that some of the most famous names in gymnastics continue to go to the ranch. We now know they're victims, and nobody got them help. Most of those women on that team, on the Olympic team, I can tell you I represent Ashton Locklear, who's a 2016 Olympic alternate who lives in Houston, and she and her teammates learned about it on the television. That's the first time they heard about it. No one from USA Gymnastics ever called them and said, this isn't treatment, this is abuse. And we're really sorry. What USA Gymnastics did is they let Nasser put out a Facebook post and a false narrative that he was retiring so he could run for school board in Michigan. They absolutely knew he was doing that. He told them that was he was going to do, and that's what he did. And every day he would go to his office at Michigan State after 2015, and every week he would go to Twistars, and he would abuse little girls in that room, putting his bare hand in their vagina and their anus. And all the time, Mrs. Karolyi knew that allegation was there, and she did nothing. That deserves an investigation. Other questions? Now.
My understanding is that the Texas Attorney General doesn't investigate sexual abuse cases. Are you just looking for him to leave the child?
That's not true, okay? So the Texas Attorney General's office can take over, like any other Attorney General's office, any case they choose. They need to coordinate this case because it's an interstate case. They're interstate crimes and they're transnational and international crimes. This needs to be a coordinated investigation with other attorney generals. And they need to, even if he doesn't want to take it over, how about calling the DA in Walker County and saying, Joe, or whatever his name is, maybe you ought to look into this and maybe you ought to execute a search warrant. I mean, what else do you need? You got a sworn deposition that says it, and nothing happened. So, I just want to, does anybody have any other questions? Over 20. In the course of his time at the ranch, I would estimate there's probably, 200 women who were there. Many have come forward. Some probably haven't. But when you have, bronze medalists, gold medalists, silver medalists raising their hand and saying, this happened to me. I mean, clearly, USA Gymnastics' own policy, for example, basically said, we won't even address your complaint about child sexual abuse unless you file a written complaint to the president of the organization. Their own policy violated the state law in every state of the union. That was their written policy until this year. I just want to tell everybody, we have if you want to do individual interviews, we've got a banquet room across the street reserved, so if you want to talk to any of the survivors one-on-one, they're available, and you just need to walk across the street and look. Okay, thank you so much for coming.